So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we make a return to Siege Battles, and this one is on a map called Oldbourne or Upbourne perhaps, one of the two. The settlement itself has actually had its template used on another battle map as well called the Old Forest Road, but we have seen it in this variant once before as well, and it's actually a pretty decent settlement for defenders to try and dig in on. It is a little bit open, but the positions you can take up really are pretty darn good, I would suggest. But yeah, we have the dwarves and the elves on the defence today, and it is 2v4, which is a pretty rare kind of battle replay to see, actually. We have seen the defenders outnumbered by at least 2 armies on several occasions with 5v3s, but 2v4 is a little bit different. In many ways, I think this actually gives the defenders even less margin for error, because there are simply fewer of them, and especially when you consider it's the elves and the dwarves facing down against the forces of evil today. But the sheer quality that elves and dwarves tend to have means they should be able to bridge that gap in terms of numbers with quality a little bit easier than most perhaps. But we'll get on with the army compositions themselves fairly quickly here. It's actually going to be Dorwinion marching forward on the attack, so I suppose if they were marching from the east, Dorwinion would be the first realm to fall under the might of the Easterlings, so they're going to be marching in step with the invaders today with some Elvelyn infantry here. Dorwinion are actually quite a well-rounded faction. They're not a particularly surprising one. If you're facing off against Dorwinion, you're pretty much going to know what they're going to be bringing because their roster isn't that large. And it is split between very clearly the more damage-dealing elves against the more solid baseline human units that they have, with a little bit more of a focus around their armour. Yeah, the Elvelyn are also going to be one of the main things that you can expect to see on the attack as well, if I'm being honest, because they're a little bit cheaper and they're going to offer you that little bit more efficiency when they are moving forward. So Elvelyn infantry and Elvelyn Vanguard in equal measure, I would imagine. Possibly a little bit of a tilt towards the Elvelyn infantry, a bit better in melee, but the Vanguard, of course, have got those defensive values. Morroquendi pikes are also here, which will still be very, very useful if they can get themselves set. Both of the defending armies do have access to some of the best pikes in the game, but the Morroquendis are no slouches, and they will be able to set up a very nice anchor for the front line, but they will be very, very vulnerable to enemy missiles, especially considering who one of the defensive factions are. I would imagine that we are missing, at the very least, some Keldon River Patrol, because they're relatively cheap. Cheap javelins are always going to be useful for attackers for their efficiency and their ability to be a really awkward foe for defenders to deal with efficiently. Morroquendi bows are not going to be the best at trading ammunition with the enemy, in spite of the fact they are the more damaging mainline Dorwinion archer. They're more expensive and they're going to do less well when placed under serious duress from range. But we'll see how it goes for them. The extra damage could be useful, especially if they're saved for later. But the real skirmish archer, of course, is the Elvelyn marksman, like I just said. Significantly less damaging than the elves they're marching alongside, but you get more value for money off of them in this kind of situation, I think, where you're going to have to be taking damage primarily. The plate armour that the Elvelyn wear is going to stand them in good stead there, and they're going to be able to trade decently with the enemy. And like I said, it's a conundrum for the defenders to try and work out, because there's a lot of range power when you consider all 5 of these archer units put together. And the Hammer Guard, not necessarily the worst choice of unit this to bring, I don't think, because the Elvelyn Hammer Guard do have those shields, better armour value. They may not be quite as impressive in melee as the Glade Lords, but yeah, I think the armour piercing as well is also a very attractive thing when you're talking about facing down against the dwarves. Speaking of which, they're conquerors, I would assume, in Rhun, played by Samloose06. Plenty of armour piercing that Rhun bring to bear. We've seen Rhun an awful lot over the course of the past couple of months. Not too surprising that, because Rhun are a very good faction to play. They're good all-rounders. There's few situations in which Rhun are going to be completely helpless, although they are of course best when they're facing off against a faction that has an armoured focus. The dwarves can certainly count themselves in that number. The Gamprim, the Eastlings will struggle when it comes to sheer quality against the dwarves, but the Gamprim, as they very often are very key for the Eastlings in making sure that those engagements are a little bit more favourable for them. There's a gap here which could mark Carmel's Shadow Guard or Shadow Bows, or both. Once again, we see the Eastron Guard, a very puzzling kind of unit in the game, because they're a very flimsy unit of spears in technical terms, and that makes them rather unappealing in the current meta of the game. But we've seen an awful lot of them lately, and they haven't been too bad most of the time when we've seen them, so I may have to start readjusting my expectations with them, but against the kind of opposition they're up against here, that Spear Malice is surely going to come into play against them. Nalrim, more of a damage-focused archer, not quite as damaging as the Morroquendi bows we've seen already from Dorwinion, but they will still do a decent amount of damage from afar. A couple of units of Scionrim as well, so a tanky unit of spears, which is going to be important just for maintaining the assaults. We've seen somewhat recently on a siege of Minas Morgul where the attacks started to fall apart, and one reason for that was primarily they just weren't committing enough to the front lines, but also worth bearing in mind was the fact that you're going to need to have some real solidity on the front line, and that's what the Scionrim will offer you. A bit of a gap as well, maybe that's more Carmul's units, a couple more Gamprim. Not surprising as well to see a core of the Flagrim, the standard line infantry units, of course shielded more readily than the Gamprim, so they're going to be a little bit better at mitigating arrow fire, but primarily they're still going to be all about that armour piercing and melee, which means they're going to far prefer to fight off against the dwarves, and the general going to be in the Carmel's Chosen, which is a relatively run-of-the-mill unit as far as a bodyguard tier unit goes. But yeah, sword and shield, but no armour piercing for them, but they still have a higher level of quality comparatively speaking. We then have Rhys, who's playing as Isengard. We have got some Uruk-hai infantry on the front line once again. A good frontline combatant as we've seen, probably the best all-round as we've seen so far, but considering the situation, you could make the argument in favour of the Flagrim as long as they commit themselves against the dwarves exclusively. But yeah, the Uruk-hai infantry, they're a little bit more expensive than your average line infantry unit, but well worth it. They've got very good armour values, good damage as well actually for the class of unit that they are, and they pair very, very nicely with the unit that's just in behind them being the Uruk-hai pikemen. They don't have quite the same vulnerabilities in terms of their armour value that the Morroquendi pikes do, and in fact I think they're more heavily armoured as well than the Gamprim. No shields though, as very few pikes tend to have shields in the game as it stands, but yes, Uruk-hai pikemen just in behind the infantry there. A couple of units of armour piercing shock troops with Baneguard and Reavers, and are they on the other side as well? No, but we do have the Nazkai. Looks like 2 units of Nazkai, which I think is a little... No, that is just 1. Okay. I was going to say the layout there made me think it was 2, but no, just 1 unit of Nazkai. Fair enough. Big armour piercing damage once more, which is more going to be useful against the dwarfs, but we'll see. Trolls of the White Hand. As we've seen in the past, trolls can get dealt with pretty quickly, especially against high quality troops, such as the ones they're going to have to try and tangle with here. We'll see if the trolls can commit themselves at the correct time. And we have the Isengard Ballista, which is going to be potentially devastating, potentially useless depending on how the battle goes and where the defenders exactly set up. But if they set up in full view of the Isengard Ballista, that's one of the ways in which the defenders can make this a very painful time, or the attackers can make this a very painful time for the defenders indeed. Dwarves and elves, with how small their armies are, cannot afford to get put in the ground by that Isengard Ballista, as they will do if they are unwise. A couple of units of Dunlending clansmen here as well to help pad out the numbers of the Isengard army, and over here we've got a couple of units of Uruk-hai crossbows as well. Nice stopping power on them if they can get in close and start doing damage to the right targets, something else which will make life very awkward for the defenders indeed. And more quality going to be injected into the attacking force as well. JKL playing as Umbar. He's got some Naruna Aru Royal Guard over here, another force which is going to make life awkward when it comes to skirmishing for the defenders. Dorwinion, the main contributors to that up to this point, but I think Umbar are going to take the cake when it comes to how well they can do in an elongated and protracted skirmish. So yeah, that's where the general is. We've got a gap there which may very well signify Castamir's Rangers. Very dangerous. Corsair Infantry, we saw them perform decently during their attempted defence of the Corsair Island recently, with the armour upgrade as well, when they had to act more as infantry than they ever have done really in any past battle replays. On this occasion though, they're going to be far more of a supporting unit, being an annoyance at long range and then being committed for their numbers later when they are required. Corsair Blackguards, that level of damage is not the sort of thing that the defenders can afford to take lightly either. They can also chip in melee later. Upgraded Balagai Footmen, so they're going to be a little bit tankier, as are the Balakith Shield Bearers and the Archers, and pretty much anything that can have an armour upgrade in view here has been given the armour upgrade, so going to mitigate that range fire which the defenders are going to be so reliant upon. So again, Balagai Footmen, those Balakith Shield Bearers as well. looking menacing with those maces, but maybe not on this side of things where they're more going to be up against the elves. More pikes in the Ardenheim Shield Guard as well. Worth bearing in mind the locked morale that the Black Númenóreans among the Umbar roster have at their disposal, so they're not going to run away so easily. And that will be a trait they may need to rely upon. Diego Rio Ramos is playing as Lothlorien. As I mentioned, armor piercing isn't going to be useless against Lothlorien, and there's plenty of it among the attacking forces, but it's not going to be as useful as it's inevitably going to be against the dwarves, and Lothlorien also at long range are more of a concern than the dwarves, I would say. They do pair off with one another quite nicely though. Marchwarns of the Wood, a couple of them, the poison projectiles. I just mentioned the locked morale of the Umbar units, at least some of them, but any units that can be routed, the Marchwardens are actually a really, really good standard archer for that very reason. We have down here some Lorinand archers which have also set up some stakes, but no mounted units, so they're just going to be purely cosmetic. The heavier Lorinand archer, plenty of damage on them as well, however. We have got some Kindred of Celeborn with their split shot projectiles in a very nasty position indeed. They'll be able to shoot right down this approach. Lorien taking full ownership of this side of the settlement, and then a large blob where they're going to be moving all of the rest of their units, primarily comprised of the heavier units Lorien have to offer. Lorinand Swordmasters, we've got some more Kindred of Celeborn in there, which is where the general is. Riders of the Golden Wood offer them a little bit of mobility, so they can get out onto the open field, and as far as horse archers go, they are the most impressive one in the game as it stands. Multiple HP, Silverthorn arrows, all of that good stuff. Watchers of the Golden Wood offer the same thing on foot, and are probably the best Lorien unit in melee when it comes to dealing damage. Lorinand Axemen are a very damaging unit of line infantry. The centrepiece of the Lorien defence is going to be the Caras Galadon's Guardians, as it often is when Lorien are defending in a siege battle like this. Lorinand Warriors as well offer the defenders a bit of extra armour piercing. They shouldn't lack for that as well, with Khazad-Dum being the other defender. They should have plenty of ability to crack through the more armoured units among the attackers, and all of the attacking factions rely on armour to a certain extent. Lorien Spearmen, some Woodland Protectors offering some armour piercing at range, and some Lorinand Archers there as well. And that's pretty much all we can see from them. So moving on to the player who sent me the battle replay, which is going to be Zelhain. We have got some fully upgraded 3rd Legion Infantry. Khazad-Dum, fantastic at holding a line, of course. It's better when the battlefield is narrower. There are 4 ways into this settlement, so they may have to spread themselves a little thinner than they'd like, but they'll be certainly hoping their quality is enough to see them over the line. The 4th Legion Shield Guard, once upon a time they didn't have the Spear Malice, and it made them pretty much the most efficient mainline line unit in the game. But now they do have the Spear Malice, but they're still a fantastic unit. The Dwarven stats are so high that the Spear Malice is not the same turn-off that it is with many others. The upgraded 2nd Legion Axe Guard as well, we've already mentioned the benefits that armour piercing may bring. Speaking of which, the Hammers of Gundabad also twin that with locked morale, so the defenders will keep fighting till the bitter end. Though I will say, if the defenders are getting themselves into a situation where a unit would rout, if not for locked morale, then they're probably in a bad place in terms of the casualties they're sustaining, and it probably isn't looking good for them. 4th Legion Shield Guard, 3rd Legion Infantry, we've got some more 2nd Legion Axe Guard, all units we've seen up till now. The highest echelon of the Legion is the Legion Bodyguard, the most standard of Khazad-Dum's bodyguard, but even the standard Dwarven bodyguard is of course very, very strong. Going to be able to one-to-one pretty much anything the attackers have at their disposal, other than maybe the Hammer Guard because of the armour piercing. More Hammers of Gundabad. We have more 3rd Legion, more 2nd Legion, so plenty of Legion units, none of the standard units really, so the dwarves going full in for their quality. And if they are going to win this battle, it will be based upon quality, so maybe that's not surprising. One of the ways in which they can certainly do that are the terrifying Iron Watch of Miramir. Every bit as dangerous as the likes of the Witchers, in many ways even more so because they're a safer unit. They don't have quite the same burst potential, but I'm sure we'll see why they're so feared going further into this battle. A couple of units of Khazad-Dum Reclaimers, another one of Khazad-Dum's more damaging ranged options, far closer quarters of course, but the attackers are going to have to advance into their range, and that's going to be very nice for them, and they're also armour-piercing shock troops in melee. A couple of units of Sons of the Fallen are fantastic for holding a line. Again, very, very strong spears. Not the best maybe at dealing damage, but that's what other units in the Dwarven roster are for, like the 3 HP Mithril Guard, the armour-piercing of the Khazad-Dum, or the Guards of Khazad-Dum as well. When it comes to a roster of bodyguard infantry, the dwarves really can't be beaten, either Khazad-Dum or Erebor. They've got 4 options each, and all of them are really, really strong. Actually, no, Khazad-Dum have only got 3 fully infantry-focused options, but even so, fantastic. And then the 1st Legion Pikes, the other best unit Pikes in the game, they and Lothlorien duke it out for that title, but they'll be fighting side by side here today, and if they're left over at the end, it could be real problems, especially given that that's yet more armour-piercing Khazad-Dum have at their disposal. So I will make a little bit of a cut, because the attackers do have a little bit of ground to cover, but I can't imagine it'll take too long for this battle to get underway. It's a fairly long one in terms of frames after all, but it is a fairly substantial nut that the attackers will have to crack here. So yeah, I'll make a bit of a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle is getting underway. So it does appear that Umbar are going to be the ones to get things going a little bit further ahead of their allies here, with the Lothlorien split-shot projectiles already being utilised to pretty devastating effect on this unit of Balaguer Archers. I wasn't expecting a force to come forward this quickly, but I suppose if their idea is to try and soften the enemy up with a bit of skirmishing first and foremost, which in a 4v2 is not the worst idea, especially not for a faction with the abilities of Umbar at long range, but considering many shots have already been sustained by Umbar, and the fact that Lothlorien do have the damage to worry even chunkier Umbar archers, probably not going to bear as much fruit as JKL over here would have been hoping for. Some Balaguer footmen also on the way forwards. Then again, do Lothlorien really have a choice? Can they really allow full units of Balaguer archers like this to get fully situated? I'm not sure. And now, getting involved in melee is maybe less of an option. Spear to spear, Lorien spearmen will easily have the beating of Balaguer ones, and there isn't a huge amount of infantry in close proximity. And they're trying to reposition themselves by the looks of it. What are Lorien attempting to do? So, trying to... I see what they're trying to do. So they're going to try and angle the engagement so that the spears of the Lorien spear, or the shields I should say, of the Lorien spearmen are not pointing in the correct direction, and the Balaguer archers can do the heavy lifting while the Balaguer footmen simply hold them in place. That's not a bad idea. I don't think it's going to work necessarily, because I really don't think that the Balaguer footmen are going to be able to do the business, and especially with the support of the Kindred of Caliborn further diminishing the potential DPS on the Balaguer archers. And then there's also the small matter of potentially routing at the hands of the poison projectiles. Meanwhile, from the front, we're also seeing the first melee engagement. Getting things underway quickly is Rhys with the Isengard army. Lorien archers ready to shoot should the need arise, but for the time being, they are rightfully confident in the dwarves' ability to hold the line. The 4th Legion Shield Guard will easily be enough. The Uruk-hai Reaver is probably a tempting target for the archers, but I don't think that the armour piercing is going to offer too much of a problem in the long run. I think they're simply not going to be quality enough to deal with the kind of Legion units being thrown at them, and with the 3rd Legion especially dealing extra damage to these lowly Isengard forces, it's not going to end too well for them. The reinforcements for Isengard very far away as well, so this initial front line is going to have to make do with itself despite being of lower quality. And I never like seeing that, because it's always a sign that things may very well end up going awry. You can see Dorwinion going to be taking the northward approach, Rhun going to be marching in from the east, rather fittingly. But they are not yet ready to get their attacks underway. While Umbar, perhaps slightly against their own will, Umbar are being engaged in melee, with Lorien willing to take the aggressive action with a unit of their spears to try and deal with the initial forces that Umbar have sent to try and probe the front lines. And also with the unit of Lorien axemen coming in here as well. Balaguer footmen not taking damage at a hugely fast rate, but morale-wise things are looking a bit ropey, and especially with the extra damage that the Lorien axemen are able to deal at speed, I can't imagine that they're going to hang around for too long and will probably end up routing in double quick time. Lorien spearmen were going to counter-attack downhill further into Balaguer archers, but they're going to get some Corsair infantry forward a little bit better, you'd have to say, at defending themselves in melee, and as they are split in the manner that they are, bit of crossfire being set up to try and go after those Lothlorien spearmen. Valagai footmen actually did stabilise themselves as well, so being able to shoot into the back of these Lothlorien units. The shape of this engagement has been a little awkward for the elves. I like the aggression, but Umbar, with lower end units, has been making the attempt to mould the engagement to their liking a little bit more, which I do like. Archmans of the Wood has ceased firing. Kindred of Celeborn, I don't know how much ammunition they necessarily have left at their disposal. Archmans of the Wood will have a little bit more, of course, going after still those Belagair archers, trying to rout them perhaps, but maybe it's time to cut your losses and try and shoot something with a little bit more left in the tank. Meanwhile, Lothlorien archers actually were engaged by the Dunlending clansmen trying to go up and over the hill, which is all well and good, but I don't know if a unit like this is going to be able to establish a beachhead for long enough for that to be worthwhile. You can see that another unit of Baneguard did move forward, and indeed I think they're all that's left on the front line at this point, but the Dwarven legions stand strong. You can see that Uruk-hai Reavers are running, as are the Dunlending clansmen, as are the Baneguard. So what Rhys needs to do now is readjust what he's trying to do and go instead for a little bit of quality on the front line. But also, surely the allies in other parts of the map need to start thinking about moving forwards as well. Lothlorien archers going after the Snaga skirmishers on the approach, so not wanting to let those cheap javelins get any value, which is all well and good, but it's an expensive unit of archers to use the ammunition of against something like the Snaga. Meanwhile, over here, Keldon River Patrol are able to get into a position. Much like the Snaga are trying to do from the south, the javelins are colliding with the 4th Legion. They're having to move forward. Rhun going to be better set up for dealing with these Dwarven units. Flagrim in there, the numbers of the East Strong Guard, the support of those javelins, already taking a fair amount of damage from the high ground there. Once again, the Elven Archer support has been very, very good across all of the front lines thus far. Again, Dwarven infantry units. The Flagrim will have a little bit more staying power than the shock infantry that Isengard have committed in as well, so especially with the numbers back up. They will do a bit more damage, but the Dwarven units should still hold the front line without too many issues. And especially if they get a nasty side-swiping charge with the 2nd Legion Axe Guard. Some Dorwinion units are also making their way up this path, and the rest of the army moving in over here, but not the entirety of the Dorwinion army, so maybe the northward approach is going to be the one least prioritised. Which this may be why, if Dorwinion was paying attention enough to see the Cairn Amroth Rangers getting into position. Dorwinion, as we mentioned as well with the Elvalin Marksmen, better set up for skirmishing like this, especially against very light archers like the March Wardens. Elvalin Vinegard moving in, not the best shape of engagement, because now they're going to be at least partially enveloped by the 4th Legion, and as far as spears go, once again, we're going to see the dwarves have a significant edge in this particular battle. The armour of the Vinegard will keep them alive that little bit longer, considering the Dwarven Spear Malice, but it's certainly not going to be enough. Yeah, going after the Cairn Amroth Rangers, definitely the right thing to do. Now they've been revealed by a single unit of spears. If that's the idea, to sacrifice them and try and deal with more of those Rangers, then that is nice, even if it wasn't the idea and it's just something that they've stumbled upon. I think it's fair enough. Umbar moving forward with the Corsair infantry, once again trying to show off their abilities a little bit more in melee. Balance of forces evenly matched as the Lothlorien Axemen do their thing. Corsair infantry, victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. With those Axemen moving forward further, I'm actually very impressed that the Belagair footmen over here are still alive and never routed. I mean, they're obviously very depleted. The amount of kills they've got probably very limited, but the fact they've managed to hold on to the front line, it does go to show the virtues of basic but reasonably tanky spears like this. Umbar's damage dealing comes from other sources, but even some of their more bread and butter units are capable of withstanding punishment even against impressive elven quality. Defeat still seems certain for Lothlorien, which the front line is pretty thin, with an extra unit of Lorien axemen arriving. Yeah, you can see that the advanced unit of Corsair infantry is going to end up perishing pretty quickly, but once again the Corsair infantry actually proving themselves to be a fairly reasonable unit. Further down the hill there's more Corsair infantry, there's Balagire archers on station. Pushing forward once again, another clutch of Corsair infantry. Frontline fairly static so far, you'd have to say. Well, Snaga skirmishers actually doing a pretty good job getting into position here and poking away at the Dwarven front line. It's not as if they escaped completely unscathed against all of that armor-piercing Isengard committed forward. It was just they were always going to be able to outlast them. With a little bit of further softening from the javelins, I actually think the Uruk-hai infantry should fairly easily win against just the shield guard. Might be a little bit different if the 3rd Legion decides to commit themselves forward as well. Uruk-hai infantry, of course, a bit more of a serious unit. They will be able to establish themselves on the front line far more than the initial forces that Isengard sent forward. What have we over here? Rhun trying to utilise their flaming shot, going after the other unit of Kindred of Celeborn, which is all well and good, but of all the Lothlorien archers, the 2 very high tier ones are going to be able to withstand more punishment. As you can see, here's some Elvalin infantry moving forward in support of the runic advance. Flagrim, defeat still seems certain for them. The 4th Legion Shield Guard have taken losses but still stand firm. The front line certainly still thick enough to continue battling. Further back, the Elvalin infantry and Isengard that have been committed forward are also taking hits, and a big part of that will be the commitment of some Lorien warriors. That level of armour piercing is not the sort of thing which Elvalin are going to be able to comfortably deal with. And now some Scion Rim are also on the way forwards. Heavy unit of spears. Should keep the attack going for a little bit longer, but Rhun, there's also still some Morroquendi from Dorwinion, but not a huge amount of ground is being made up so far. And over here, yeah, I just saw the Corsair infantry now starting to get sent back the other way. One unit of Corsair infantry still has a bit of ammunition, but with some Lorien Swordmasters and that fresh unit of Lorien Axemen we saw last time, reinforcements a little bit too far away. The Corsair infantry has done pretty well, punching above its weight a little, but not to the extent that was required here when Lothlorien committed forward their reinforcements. March Wardens utilising those poison projectiles. Further in, meanwhile, Elvalin infantry, Keldon River Patrol actually able to get up onto the bank here, and this could be a significant oversight from the defenders. Pathways leading up and around this front line, and for now it's only Keldon River Patrol, but as soon as it becomes something a little bit more serious like Nandor Glade Guard or any of the Elvalin units which are able to establish themselves more easily, then it's going to be a problem. There's a lot of Elvalin units here on the front line, the marksmen presumably running their ammunition supply dry, which is a good sign for attackers. Hammers of Gundabad are a real problem, of course, but the Elvalin Hammer Guard will at least be able to withstand them to a certain extent. What's going on over here? Yeah, broken and fighting to the death. Not too surprising that, getting into the Woodland Protectors, but Dorwinion making a play here. Units forcing their way through the front line. They're not going to be able to break the Dwarven front line for the reasons already mentioned. Hammer Guard are locked morale, which may actually be Khazad-Dum's saving grace here. It will give them the extra time needed, and the 2nd Legion Axe Guard are on the way forward once again to surround the surround. Is that going to be enough to make the difference? Defeat seems certain. Well, I mean, it's a small choke point, but Tommy the Wise is making the most of what he has at his disposal. Meanwhile, over here, equipment of that Legion bodyguard to the front line alongside some Elven support has been a problem for Rhun's continued advancing. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen now using their throwing projectiles. Point blank into the 2nd Legion X-Guard, getting some pretty nice value off of them. It was a blank fire, which is a little bit unfortunate. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen now retreating. They may have what it takes to finish off those 2nd Legion X-Guard at this point. The Camille's Shadow Guard vulnerable to arrow fire, but the armour piercing at this point is something that they can't forego, really. Damage has been done to the defenders, yet they've always looked fairly comfortable on this front line. Some more movement in behind, some Lothlorien warriors. I like the early use of bodyguard units as well from any side. It's a sign of boldness. This, meanwhile, Isengard perhaps finding a little bit more joy. Some Uruk-hai infantry moving forward. I do think actually they should be making the attempt to be more aggressive than they're being here, Isengard, because I think of all the attackers, they've got maybe the best opening to try and take advantage of. The Watchers of the Golden Wood in behind, which will almost certainly start firing as soon as Isengard make any real progress, but at the very least it would start shining a spotlight on maybe some defending inadequacies in other parts of the battlefield. Less reinforcements would arrive there. Isengard's allies would have a little bit more breathing room, that sort of thing. Hammers of Gundabad, however, alongside out of ammunition Lorien archers, the amount of numbers now crashing down upon the Uruk-hai infantry that still remain is a problem, and I think this has been a problem certainly for Isengard, but to a certain extent Umbar as well, where the reinforcements have just been too far away, not able to get up in support of their attacks in a timely fashion, and that has consistently been an issue. Only half. Now then, over here, the elves continuing, to a certain extent anyway, to pursue Umbar down the hill, and they will still be able to hoover up some of these units of very depleted archers. But once again, I think JKL has been able to get some pretty decent value off of his ranged units so far. Lorien have definitely not had it all their own way over here, in spite of the pretty significant losses they've been able to inflict on Umbar. Forward come a unit of Balagai footman. Getting into melee. Already shaken. A sign of how strong those Lorien units are at dealing damage. Narina Ari Royal Guard, not a particularly damaging archer, but they've got good targets to go after here. Missiles continuing to move in. Lorien Axemen trying to go down the hill. I mean, this is a doomed endeavour from them, yeah, and they break almost immediately with some, certainly with stronger Umbar infantry moving forward in force all of a sudden. It was never going to end particularly well for them, so it's a little bit surprising that they tried it in the first place. Balakith's shield bearers, of course. The armour piercing not entirely wasted against the high-end Elven infantry, but the shield bearers themselves, the stats may be a bit more of a problem, but this is much more like it from Umbar, and all of a sudden you can see that some Balagai footmen that went around have been able to cut off this unit of Marchwards of the Wood, and I think this is where the defenders will probably be looking across the battlefield as a whole to start pulling back. You can see that the push from Dorwinion has been sustained, and they have managed to engage with a fair few of these units. A good opportunity for the Riders of the Golden Wood. That wasn't a particularly great charge, but the Horse Archers should still be able to make something happen. Defeat is almost a certainty. And then further back, Lorien warriors. Taking more hits. More Friendly bows up on the high ground now as well, giving Lorien a taste of their own medicine with those poison projectiles. I think that might very well be the end of those Elvelin marksmen, however, woodland protectors pinning them in place with the hammer and anvil strikes, but they need to be careful of the pikes and the sticky nature of Medieval 2 cavalry once again proving to be a concern there. Rhun, on the other hand, still having to contest this front line, and it's because the Legion Bodyguard is still here, such a strong unit. Gamprim retreating. Morquendi bows in position also. Legion Bodyguard still victory seems certain for them in spite of the armour piercing and quality that's about them. Dwarven Bodyguards are not to be taken lightly, of course. And Isengard, what do they still have remaining? And perhaps in an effort to keep Isengard further back than their allies, a bit of a counter-attack down the hill, Dwarven shock infantry only. Of course that will be very good against the Orthanc-made plate armour. However, pikes are going to be very useful. The closer reinforcements now of Isengard also going to be utilised. Those Uruk-hai crossbows, however, being bullied at long range there by those Lorinand archers. Further afield, the trolls are now moving forward. There's still the Isengard ballistas, so still a lot of interesting units that the attackers will be able to use in the late game here. However, we've yet to see the Iron Watch or the Khazad-Dum reclaimers. So it's going to be the Dwarven support units, I think, in the late game, which are going to be very, very important. Attackers have also got that, though. We've already mentioned the Isengard ballista, but also these Corsair crossbowmen. There's still more Uruk-hai crossbowmen, of course. Elvelin marksman. Still alive, in spite of the attentions of those watchers of the, or riders of the Golden Wood, I should say. And now Rhun trying to finish off what remains of that Dwarven bodyguard, but blobbing themselves up, and that provides a very nice target for the Kindred. I don't know how much ammunition Lothlorien are going to have left in the late game, but generally speaking, across the field, they've used it pretty well in terms of numbers of kills. We'll learn in the late game, by victory or defeat, whether or not the quality of those kills was actually of the necessary level. I don't know. Gamprim could be an important unit in the late game as well, but the two high-end pikes as well. If it comes down to pure melee, which we're still a ways off from that, taking that into consideration, but if it comes to pure melee, the two best unit of pikes in the game are still in the back pocket for the defenders. Corsair fencers moving forward. The trolls moving back down the hill now to recharge what remains of the Dwarven resistance down here. In all fairness, these Dwarven units, if they can get a few decent swings off, which the Hammers of Gundabad won't rout at the very least, you can see the trolls are falling by the wayside pretty quickly, so maybe not the best unit for the trolls the White Hounds move into. Trying to save them to maybe mess up pike formations in the late game may have been the play there, but no matter. What's done ultimately is done. Elsewhere, Uruk-hai crossbowmen slowly trudging their way forward still. Second Legion X-Guard defeat seems certain, you don't say. Skewered by pikes. They actually, yeah, they're wavering, I was going to say. Yeah, they break. Only 4 Hammers of Gundabad remain, so they killed off some of the trolls though, and the trolls will be damaged for when they are... when the attempt to utilise them happens later. Balagair archers. Watchers of the Golden Wood have just sort of stood here. Don't know what Lothlorien are doing with them. Because they still certainly have their ammunition, surely. A little bit sloppy, that. Down come the Sons of the Fallen. Yeah, Balagair archers rout upon seeing them round the corner. Watchers will get out of there. If they still have any of their Silverthorn arrows remaining, which I haven't seen them fire yet, so they should. A fair few dead Khazad-Dum reclaimers up here, which I'm a little bit surprised about. Has that been as a result of Corsair crossbows, or perhaps The Isengard ballista. I mean, they're getting into position now, but the Corsair crossbows are there. As much as this is a fantastic position to shoot from, it's also a great position for the attackers to shoot into, especially with units like the Corsair crossbows. So if the Khazad-Dum reclaimers are going to set up position here, they're going to have to start firing pretty much immediately. 3 Karen Amroth Rangers, so they definitely took a beating at the hands of Dorwinion. If the attackers do go on to win this, that will definitely be worth bearing in mind. Doing a lot of damage pretty quickly there to the Corsair crossbows. But surely the reprisal is going to be forthcoming. Yeah. The numbers being what they are and the fire rate being what it is as well, you would actually back the Corsair crossbows. But is this the sort of thing the defenders can allow the attackers access to? Is this the right thing to be doing? Or should the reclaimers be being placed behind cover and saved? I don't know. Once again, a bit of a strange shape to the engagement. Sons of the Fallen moving in alongside some depleted Loren-armed archers. they should have the upper hand over something like the Corsair Blackguards. The Blackguards are far from defenceless in melee, but they shouldn't have what it takes to truly even this fight up. Dragon's Wrath. Watchers of the Golden Wood. Do they still have ammunition? I mean, Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, I think, are trying to get into a good position to just throw directly into the backs of these units over here. Woodland Protectors, they're trying to use their superior positions. Oof. Trading like this, however, across pretty much all of their high-end projectiles that we've seen used so far is probably not what the defenders want to be doing. The attackers still have more than enough supporting tools to make this a losing proposition for the defenders. All of a sudden they find themselves a little bit more on the back foot. We're near enough of the final 10k frames, so the ascent to the summit of the settlement as the initial choke points have fallen is going to be the final phase. It's not going to be a battle taking place fully on the outer layer, which is good to see. Further advancements happening. Kindred of Celeborn joining in melee, but only just as the Sons of the Fallen are basically being overcome. So timing here from the defenders, they're having a bit of a nightmare so far. They were doing, they did reasonably well on the outer layer, I think. It was definitely an acceptable performance going into the late game here, but they're making too many missteps here, and with the numbers the attackers have, I worry for their future in this fight. As the Khazad-Dum reclaimers continue to throw. Woodland Protectors trying to do the same, but those Corsair crossbows in particular will have been a massive problem. The damage they're capable of doing. Hits. That is the Iron Watch. They are firing, but they're firing from a fair distance, so they may be getting hits, but not to the extent that they could be. Once again, the front line. Watchers of the Golden Wood. They may very well be out of ammunition at this stage, I don't know. Sons of the Fallen with them, so that's a pretty serious front line, but Umbar trying to mitigate that by holding them at bay with pikes. Very good unit for getting excellent value in melee over a period of time. You don't often have, you don't often have the luxury of that time with pikes. Certainly not as the attackers very often, but at this stage in the battle, perhaps it is doable. One thing that the attackers might be slightly worried about is the level of quality that they're still faced with. Only the Legion Bodyguard really have been, well, and that unit of Kindred of Celeborn, I guess now, have been expended as far as really high-end units go for the defenders so far. But they're still trying to savour their momentum here as they continue to push forward the attackers. Guards of Khazad-Dum. That armour piercing is all well and good, but Balakith Shield Bearers trying to be used as that mass pushing unit, which I think is going to be more readily the case in the next version of the game when that comes out. They need to be careful though. Balakith units, unlike the upper echelon of the Umbar forces, are not locked morale. They are not in fact Black Numenorians. Perhaps partially, but the blood is too diluted. Oof. there goes the Dorwinion general. I mean, this is where the whole battle could turn. That Iron Watch, they did get a little bit of friendly fire there, it must be said, but the thing about the Iron Watches, the amount of damage they can do is very severe, and also they do tend to induce an awful lot of routing as well, so that'll be worth keeping an eye on as the battle moves forward. First Legion pikes. Further back, Morquendi bows, Uruk-hai crossbowmen still there, depleted. Any extra damage they get at range at this point for the attacks I think will be a bit of a bonus, however. I think they suffered a little bit on the outer layers on some of the choke points, but here in the ascent to the town square, you'd have to say that the defenders have been on the losing end of the ranged war, and that alone is often enough to give the attackers what they need. Throwing axes being used, and I don't really like the layout of this front line they've got either. There's still units that are not fully engaged, they're sort of hovering right at the back of the front line. They need to get involved. I think it might be time for the Meteorial Guard to get in as well. Just throw everything onto the front line, bring the Iron Watch a little bit closer, so their shots are going to be hitting true a little bit more. Oof. Really quite vicious. Morquendi pikes do rout as a result of that, though. 32 Elven units routing. It does go to show what havoc in morale terms that unit can cause. There's also poison projectiles being used by the Morquendi bows as well, which, considering the angle, it is going to be getting some friendly fire, so that's also giving a bit of a push in morale terms. And the attackers, despite none of these units being especially vulnerable, there goes the Lothlorien general. As I was saying, the attackers aren't especially vulnerable to morale shocks here. I mean, the quality of units that the Rhun and Isengard and Umbar have on the front line is decent. Some of them lock morale as well in the Aldenheim Shield Guard, but they're still going to be more susceptible to routing, comparatively speaking, when you look at the dwarves and the elves. Corsair Fencers, Dragons, Wrath, Guildsmen. Further back, victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Corsair Fencers reloading. There's still those Riders of the Goldenwood down there, 5 of them, going after some of the stragglers, trying to make full use of all the tools they still have at their disposal. Oof. Again, the Iron Watch of Miramir. I think targeting those Corsair Fencers actually, and I mean they will do an awful lot of damage to them, but there goes the Runic General. Something else which will cause some morale issues maybe, Nazkai. And the attackers are definitely running out of steam here. What do they have in reserve? Crossbows? Yeah, they're going to be reliant on their supporting units here, because the amount of damage and quality on display all of a sudden favouring the defenders, it would be fair to say. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers trying to get into a better position. The Iron Watch could have been used better as well, is the scary thing. If they'd have been positioned just so, rather than just sort of staying in their initial place on the battlefield. That'd be an interesting concept for a unit that couldn't move once you had deployed it, akin to the cannons from Shogun 2. Well, Siege in general in Shogun 2 actually, wasn't it? Corsairs, still crossbows as well, still trying to get that damage done. Corsair Fencers were going to move forward, maybe trying to go after the Khazad-Dum Reclaimers. There is a gap here that could be exploited. There's not a huge amount of infantry left to the defenders at this point after all. Decent enough rear charge, but the Meteorial Guard will make very, very quick work of the Corsair Fencers. They're still completely fresh as well. 3 hit points still intact for every combatant in that unit. What will the attackers do from here, I wonder? Because they've got to be concerned at this point. Still these Riders of the Golden Wood as well, making a real nuisance of themselves. Of course, their crossbows revealing themselves. Uruk-hai. Nazkai there as well. Victory still seems certain for the 1st Legion and co. on the front line. It is weird because, like, you know what the result of the melee engagement is going to be. It's just, I think what the attackers will probably try and do is try and draw the defenders into a counter-attack, as we saw from Lothlorien against Umbar alone earlier on, and then maybe try and hit them with a bit of crossfire from their remaining projectiles. They've got javelins, they've got crossbows, they've got poison arrows. All of this sort of thing can be a real difference maker. And then again, still a bit of range support from the defenders as well. Our blackguards still flinging javelins as well. It's just the waiting game at this point, isn't it? There's a lot happening, but in terms of the overall picture, how is this going to end? Yeah, and the Karas Galadon's Guardians, now that they do have a clear shot, the Blackguards were trying to do as much damage as they possibly could, but now being engaged in melee. Is this really half the Dwarves' force? That can't be right at all. They must have gone down to half strength ages ago. Naryn Ari Royal Guard, still very depleted crossbowmen. Everything pretty much at this point from an attacking perspective. They're trying to... No, yeah, this will probably be it though. You can see what the attackers were trying to do. Trying to get their supporting units, but with some more hits from those Iron Watch, that is surely going to be the end of proceedings. Still those Riders of the Golden Wood as well. Of course, our Blackguards. Mithril Guard being very, very slow, and that's giving, of course, our Blackguards an opportunity to get a bit of extra value. There goes the Isengard General. Be enough for any Uruk-hai crossbows that still remain to rout off a little bit more quickly, which of course just leaves the Umbar General. You can easily see where he is from his golden armour, Castamere, the poor man's Ar-Pharazôn in this case. Those Corsairs, I think they'll rout with or without Castamere's presence, however, if it is indeed the Mithril Guard that are moving forward to introduce themselves. Yeah, and they do flee pretty quickly, as do the Corsair Blackguards. Actually, no, they're not routing, but they are trying to move backwards. Another unit of Corsair Crossbowmen. I don't think 17 of them will be returning. Naryn Ari Royal Guard are locked morale, but they're going to do a lot of. They're going to take a lot of damage here. The Iron Watch may be out of ammunition now. Not particularly great in melee, it must be said. They are multiple HP, but it really is just a 2 HP brick of armour that they are in melee. But it's still something which can be useful. They're in the ascendancy here, so it's really just a case of trying to overwhelm what remains, but yeah. Blackguard still throwing javelins. Defeat a distinct possibility. Hits being sustained back there by the Morroquendi bows. Those Watchers did still have a bit of ammunition, interestingly enough. But they were needed more as melee units, during that initial push forward. And I do think the defenders, to a certain extent, there goes the final attacking general. I do think to a certain extent the attackers, or the defenders I should say, have gotten away with it a bit, because that transition from the outer choke points to here, the ranged battle went so poorly for them, and the melee setup was so clumsy. Under normal circumstances, I think that would have been enough for the attackers to do the business, but it goes to show the amount of damage that the attackers did take in the outer positions, which again confirms the fact that those elven missiles were put to good use throughout the battle as a whole. So we have our answer for that. It is very close as well in terms of numbers, though not in terms of quality any longer. 2% in favour of the defenders, and with stuff like Mithril Guard and pikes and the like. That is what it will be. We're up to times 2 speed now, because it's really just a case of search and destroy, isn't it? 12 Morroquendi bows. A nice little good versus evil siege, this. First Legion pikes trudging their way forwards as well. The attack, is it? I think the attack has been long since pressed. That's all that remains for the attackers then. JKL trying to really get the most out of his Corsair Blackguards, pad that kill count out a little bit. Defeat a distinct possibility for the Morroquendi bows. And now 1,000 frames still, are you sure? That doesn't seem quite right. They're surely going to rout instantly. It's not the best of the pirates. Actually pretty damn chunky. Even against the high quality dwarves. And there we have it. Nice little battle, this. Demonstration of dwarven and elven quality on the defence, choosing the right targets. I don't think the attackers played particularly poorly either. They definitely did some good things. I think we'll have to say that the attackers didn't lose this one, the defenders won it. That would be my assessment. Be in awe. So there we are. Primarily dwarves that remain. The elves, very, very few in number now. But yeah, a nice battle that, for the reasons I said. I think if I were the attackers, what could have been done differently? I think the reinforcements being too far away was one factor. It was very difficult, I think, for Rhun in particular. I think that front line was very harsh, like the joint dwarven and elven resistance that was there, and then also the very good overwatch from the elven archers was always going to make his life a little bit more difficult. I think that's perhaps why Dorwinion did send forward some reinforcements to try and help him, but you could tell from the runic kill count that very, very difficult situation for Sam. But yeah, interesting one this. I think, again, the Isengard Ballista, we didn't really get to see it perform to spec, at least. It may have got some good hits. I mean, you can see that it was clearly in action because some of the buildings are burning, and the Isengard Ballista is really the only thing on the field that would have been able to inflict such things, but there we go. Other than that, I don't know. I think the defenders just picked their targets well. You know, they committed units at the right time. Just a reasonably good job. Incremental things, I think, is what the attackers needed, and you know, those factors can really add up. But yeah, let's see what did the damage for Khazad-Dum. Ironwatch and Mirror with 524 kills, so again, showing themselves to be an incredibly scary unit, even though I think they could have been used, you know, to an even more deadly extent. That goes to show how punishing they can really be. If they had been moved into a slightly more advantageous position in the late game, you could probably get that score over 600. But as it was, they were still a big part in the victory here, because towards the late game, the attackers did still have the numbers advantage, and that could have been enough, especially with that momentum they were carrying forwards up top. But a combination of them and the Reclaimers with a little bit of damage here and there was enough to help them out, and of course the really high-end units, guards of Khazad-Dum, in there as well. First Legion Pikes were committed at around the same time, and they got more kills actually than all of the other bodyguard units, even the Legion bodyguard, which were committed to the outer layer, which is traditionally where you're going to get a higher kill count. The Legion units as well doing pretty well all round by the looks of things. The 3rd Legion Infantry showing their quality against this level of opposition with 415 kills, which even for an upper end unit of line infantry is a very impressive return in the situation. So yeah, big thank you to, I think it was Zelhane who sent this one to me. It's not always the case that the player who we've watched the battle from the perspective of is the one who sent it to me, but I think on this occasion it was. I can't be sure because I actually downloaded this one from Discord a fair time ago, but no matter. Big thank you to him, and big thank you to all of the other players that were a part of this battle replay as well. It's a neat little map, a more open settlement, but showed here that it's not the be-all and end-all. If it is a more open settlement, the attackers won't necessarily win because of that, and the defenders' quality saw them over the line here. But yeah, anyway, as for what's going to be coming out next, I've got a free-for-all on the Cardland Outpost, which will be the very next battle, which I've had for a while, and I do want to show it, because I did tell the Womb Raider that I would show them eventually, but now the time has come for that. Following on from that, a slightly edited version of Thranduil's Halls from Winged Swordsman 44, and then after that, a classic Moria siege, where the Misty Mountains occupy Moria, and the forces of good are trying to wrest control away from them, and that may very well be the last time we see the old version of Moria as well. So those will be the next 3. I think those actually are now the only 3 that are in my backlog directly. There are more free-for-all battles, but I want to space them out a little bit more than that, if at all possible. So those are the only 3 guaranteed. Maybe after that I'll do the Sword Cavalry Knockout Tourney if I don't have any more replays to add to the backlog by that point. Or maybe we'll take a look at the Shogun 2 Lord of the Rings mod, which I have been thinking about doing. But we'll see. Time is going to be a factor with that as well, given how interesting 2023 is likely to be. But yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.